Well, good morning. It is Monday, April the 15th. This is tax day. I know a day that all of you love and a time of joy and happiness when you can write a big check to the federal government so that they can promote wars and change the climate, change the gender of children, and all the other good things that the government does. So today we're going to be talking about the Iranian drone attack. Our topic is Iran drone attack, tempest in a teapot. I should have a question mark after that. Our guest today is Jim Jatras. You all know Jim from many appearances here. Jim, welcome to the show.
Senator, great to be here with you as always.
Well, thank you. Well, let's get right into this. We have had this tremendous sense of drama with the Iranians launching, some say 300 drones into the air. I don't know whether it's 300 or not. Sometimes you'll have 10 different people who claim that they shot down the same drone. So it's hard to say what the real number was, but a considerable number of drones. And I guess the first question we need to look at is, why did Iran launch the drones? What motivated them to do it in the first place?
Well, of course, it was the assassination of two Iranian generals and some other Iranian officers at the, I guess it's the consulate attached to the Iranian embassy in Damascus a few weeks ago. And the Iranians said that they would respond to this. As I understand it, there was a little bit of a kabuki dance back and forth between the Iranians and the Americans, that they would not hit American targets and that they would do it more as a demonstration strike than one that would be truly devastating to the Israelis, in the hope that it would be kind of like what happened after General Soleimani was assassinated during the Trump administrations. The Iranians made their point. There was no response, and that was the end of the matter. As I understand it, they launched 3 waves of whatever you want to call missiles of various sorts, drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles with different rates of arrival, but all designed to arrive at the same time. And we're getting wildly varying reports about the effectiveness of the strike on the Israeli side. As I understand it, too, the Biden administration is telling the Israelis not to respond. Biden told Netanyahu to take the win, that there was not much damage done, although the reports today that the Israelis are deciding on a counter-strike to the counter-strike, the counter-strike, and that could come as soon as today. So I think the chances that this will escalate are quite high.
Yeah. Why do you think that Israel attacked the Iranian embassy in the first place?
Well, and see, that's the thing I think is most worrisome to us, Senator, is, as the great American philosopher Yogi Berra once said, it's hard to make predictions, especially about the future. But it seems that Netanyahu, for his own personal reasons and also policy reasons, has decided that his only way out at this point is to trigger a direct conflict between the United States and in Iran. And I think he attacked that site in Damascus for precisely the reason that it would force the Iranians to do something, which then the Israelis can then respond to, until at some point the Americans are directly involved. So I think that, in fact, people are even talking about, prior to the Iranian strike, will the Iranians take the bait? Will they fall into Netanyahu's trap? And it seems that in a qualified way they have done so. I don't believe they've done so without thinking it through on their own side about how prepared they are for that eventuality. So, I think the initiative is still with Netanyahu.
And what do you think is going through Biden's mind at this point? What does he want to do?
Biden's mind. And now there's an interesting concept.
The mind of Biden.
Let's say the collective mind of what passes for Joe Biden nowadays at the White House. I think that the main calculus that's going to be going through their minds is what's the potential impact on the election in November? Is that they're trying to decide whether trying to kick the can down the road and keep the lid on this thing works better for them from an electoral point of view, or whether Joe Biden being the wartime president is better for them. Let's keep in mind that our friends on the Republican side are raising holy hell about this thing, screaming that Biden is weak and we have to hit the Iranians and defend Israel, et cetera, et cetera. So, it puts Biden in a difficult position that he may feel a lot of, the hot breath down his neck of the Republicans, calling him a coward and a traitor if he doesn't proceed with something fairly harsh against the Iranians. That's a pretty difficult political bind for him, it seems to me.
Yeah, the Republicans are in a furor. They're beating their breasts about this tremendous victory that Israel and the United States have won over this drone attack. One of the commentators this morning was saying, this shows that the United States is the only world superpower. We're the one and only, just acting as though this was some marvelous military operation that shows our supremacy over the world. We can do anything we want to anybody. Yes, the Republicans have really gone all in. There seems to be a tremendous desire within the Republican Party to attack Iran one way or the other, doesn't there?
Yeah, there is, and that also creates a kind of a dilemma for Donald Trump. Remember, Donald Trump came very close to launching an attack on Iran when they shot down that unmanned American drone a few years ago. And according to the reports, and I have no reason to doubt them, that we were within 10 minutes of launching a strike on Iran until Tucker Carlson called him and talked him out of it. And I don't know if that's true or not. I think it sounds quite plausible. And of course, one of the things that many of us who are in some ways disappointed with Trump's performance in his first administration, especially with his terrible appointees, was that at least he did not start another war. He didn't manage to get us out of Syria, but at least he did not start another war. So right now he's going around thumping his chest saying, well, Biden is weak. I'm strong. If I were president, this wouldn't be happening, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not sure where that gets anybody at the end of the day when it's all still postured in this strong versus weak rather than, smart versus dumb, which nobody ever seems to want to talk about in Washington these days.
Yeah, I do give him some credit for his attempts to withdraw from Syria. He made several attempts, one of them pretty dramatic, where he just simply announced that he had ordered all troops out of Syria immediately. And in order to counteract that, the Secretary of Defense, James Mattis, resigned to break the chain of command. And meanwhile, John Bolton jumped on a plane, I think, to Tel Aviv, where he essentially countermanded the president's order and said, no, we're not removing the troops. I don't think he did that with Trump's permission. I think he just, he had the globalists behind him. He had Israel behind him, and he just countermanded the president's order. I think with all of the maneuvering with the FBI, with the CIA, the national security apparatus, basically a grand conspiracy to overthrow the government of the United States. Trump was just sort of hanging on to his hat, trying to figure out what was going on, how did the government operate, and he was working against people. Well, people were working against him very actively, so he did want to get out of Syria, and he couldn't do it. I hope he makes a more calculated decision to do it this time, and actually pulls out of that poor country that we've just raped and savaged for years and years. Well, do you anticipate that that Netanyahu will continue his efforts to draw the United States into the war in the Middle East?
Again, it's hard to predict these things. My guess is he probably will. I don't see any other way out for him, both personally and also in terms of where Israel stands right now with its operation in Gaza, which doesn't seem to be going very well. With all the people in northern Israel have been pulled from the border areas in anticipation of a conflict with Hezbollah, and also that there has been an Israeli ultimatum with evidently no date attached that Hezbollah needs to pull back from the border area in Lebanon, which apparently they're not doing. There's just too many, let's say, buckets of combustible material lying around that could spark a region-wide conflagration. And I don't see how Netanyahu escapes from the predicament he's gotten himself into without trying to get the United States directly to attack Iran, which has been his holy grail for decades.
Yeah. There's tension on the border between Israel and Hezbollah, which is the major armed force of Lebanon. And the Hezbollah defeated Israel back, I think it was 2006, when Israel launched a ground attack, ground and air, and they were just slammed to a dead halt. And at a certain point, they just said, "Okay, this is not working out well," and they retreated back to Israel.
Yeah, and of course, Hezbollah is a vastly more formidable force today than it was in 2006. As you know, that the Hezbollah has very, very substantial military experience now from the war in Syria, where they were on the side of the Syrian government. Interestingly enough, Hamas was on the other side, I guess technically our de facto ally in Syria, trying to overthrow the Syrian government. And I think the other thing is that there's got to be somebody at the Pentagon who's got to be concerned about how vulnerable American bases and other assets around the region are if we do end up in a full-scale war with Iran, that our naval assets, our bases, air assets are in great danger against Iranian missiles if somebody pushes the button on this thing. Unfortunately, as you know, the upper ranks of the military are basically politicians in uniform. They'll do what they're told. They're part of the political establishment. And I don't know to what extent military reality will impinge itself upon these decisions.
Yeah, it's interesting that today the American generals and admirals really have minimal combat experience. And the American public doesn't understand, but war has evolved so rapidly. The battlefield is dominated by drones, by counter electronic warfare, and it has just evolved so spectacularly in Iran, or in Ukraine rather, that the low intensity combat that most of our generals encountered, where they go on patrols and there might be a few sniper rounds and a couple of mines. That's a whole different world from what's going on today.
Yeah, that's right. And as you say, Ukraine, we've seen this in every war. World War II started with biplanes and ended with jets. And there's just been a fantastic evolution of military technology that takes place in major conflicts. And I think Ukraine has turned into that. I mean, we've seen the way drone and geopositioning and so forth, very integrated communications have become essential to warfare. And I don't think our top military leaders begin to understand how that really affects a place like the Middle East, where they still think that American naval and air assets are supreme in the theater. And I think they're going to get a very rude awakening if they push the pedal on this thing. And also, then it makes you wonder too what the Russians and Chinese will do. I don't think they would get directly involved in the Middle East on Iran's side, but they would provide whatever the support they can to the Iranians. And meanwhile, you saw recently that the UN ambassador from Russia said that the only next step on Ukraine is for Ukraine's unconditional surrender. I don't know what plans they have up there, but if war breaks out in the Middle East, I think we will find out fairly soon what the Russians have in mind. And you also wonder what the Chinese will be thinking in terms of window of opportunity when the United States is deeply involved in the Middle East. If I were in Beijing, I'd be thinking very hard about those Americans are stationed on Kinmen Island and say, yeah, we want those out of there by such and such date or else. I mean, I don't, we can't, I don't think we can fight one of these wars in a meaningful sense, the way the state of the American military is right now, much less three of them. So again, I don't know who's thinking beyond short-term political gain in Washington.
I don't know exactly what the capabilities are of the Iranians when it comes to missiles designed to sink major warships. But we have seen in the Ukrainian war that the one major success that Ukraine has had recently is that they've really had a devastating impact on Russian naval power in the Black Sea. They're using NATO anti-ship missiles. Mm-hmm. They're doing it to great effect. And now Russia's never been a major naval power, so it's not going to determine the outcome of the war in Ukraine. But it is sort of a testing ground, and it shows that these anti-ship missiles are very deadly. They're very effective, and it makes you begin to think, the United States is accustomed to projecting naval power mm-hmm. through these carrier task forces, where you'll have a carrier and you may have 30 other ships that accompany it. And if there were a major concerted anti-ship effort using very advanced anti-ship missiles, I think there's a real question what the outcome might be.
Yeah, that's right. And as you point out, Ukraine, they've had some success with those. And as I understand it, those are not hypersonic missiles, whereas the Russians and Chinese certainly have them. And I think the Iranians probably do too. As you know, Colonel Douglas McGregor says there's two kinds of naval vessels. There's submarines and there's targets. And, aircraft carriers are great if we want to go fight the Battle of Midway again, or if, we're using it to go thump some pre-technological society somewhere that can't shoot back. But you notice even against the Houthis, and they're closing off the entrance to the Red Sea to shipping toward Israel, that we haven't been able to make much headway against that with our naval assets. So, I think there's a whole lot of question marks about how this would actually work out if we really want to take that next step. I don't think people in Washington want to, but I don't think they're really in control of it. I think Netanyahu is, and we're going to see what happens.
Yeah, it seems that the boys from Davos, the globalist mega billionaires. They want war. They want the U.S. involved in a direct war with Iran, especially. Um, and so we'll see how that goes. Now, just if you could, of course, the world was very focused on the the Israeli attack on Rafah within the Gaza Strip. You had this enormous number of Palestinian civilians who have been ordered to retreat here and there and everywhere, and now they're all bottled up in this one area. And the Israeli army is planning to attack, and certainly there will be a great slaughter of civilians. What effect do you think this distraction by the drones has had on the sort of the world, the global politics of concern over the slaughter of the Palestinian people by the Israeli army?
At least from what I can see in the last day or so, it has been, as you say, a distraction that fewer people are talking about what's going on in terms of the human cost in Gaza over the last few days before this latest strike by the Iranians. There was a lot of talk about famine in Gaza, the fact that hunger may accomplish what directed military force is not really able to accomplish in terms of depopulating Gaza, which seems to be the Israeli strategy. That their campaign against Hamas itself as a military force, or however you want to describe it, as a terrorist force, if you prefer, is not going all that well. But if the strategy is to drain the water in which the fish swim, which is to get rid of the population itself, that still could be a success. As far as the attack on Rafah goes, at last I heard, the Israelis had decided on a date to begin the Rafah operation, but we don't know when that date is. And there are some people who speculate that the Israelis do not have the forces assembled in order to launch that operation, and will not have it for several more weeks, if not a couple of months. So I don't know what the timetable is on that.
Now, this whole series of events that have focused attention on Israel, Gaza, the Middle East, what effect do you see on the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine?
I don't know that there is a direct connection, in the sense that for the American side, and it's kind of a whack-a-mole situation. How many places can we be busy at the same time? But also, I think it maybe masks to some extent, as you say, distracts from the fact that everybody understands that the Ukrainians are in an increasingly perilous situation. We see that Mike Johnson is talking about more getting some kind of a vote in the House to allow that $60 billion plus to go to Ukraine. I don't know that will actually make much difference in Ukraine. It's you can't buy weapons and weapon systems that don't exist anywhere and are not available for shipment to Ukraine. It'll help keep the Ukrainian government solvent and the Ukrainian kleptocracy in clover for a little while longer, and maybe make their golden parachutes as they make their escape a little more feasible. But I don't know that it'll actually make that much difference in what happens in Ukraine. If the initiative in the Middle East is all in Netanyahu's hands, in Ukraine it's all in Putin's hands, and it really depends on what the Russians have decided their end game is. And I assume they've decided, but I don't really know. Them what knows don't talk, and them what talks don't know. And I think there's probably a handful of guys in the Kremlin who really know what the game plan is, and the rest of us will find out in due course.
There was an article just yesterday that Zelensky finally approved this bill to basically expand the draft in Ukraine. And there's a great deal of discomfort among the soldiers on the front lines because the bill effectively extended their time in service. They had expected that new people would be brought in, they would return home after a couple of very brutal, trying years in battle, and now they've essentially been extended for the duration. You'll fight until you die or the war ends. And so the strains are apparent all across the front in Ukraine. Russia they haven't been moving quickly, but they've been, wherever they have fought, they've managed to eke out gains here and there. And those gains, I think, are showing that they're just, there are strains in the Ukrainian lines. They don't have the ability to reinforce, to counterattack, and so forth. And it seems like a matter of time to me before the weather has improved. It's now the armor can move around on the battlefield. Russia has accumulated very large reserves of troops, and I think it's just a matter of time before they launch 2, 3, 4 major attacks, and somewhere they're going to break through. And once they break through, I don't think Ukraine will have the reinforcements to seal the gap. And I just see the very real possibility at a certain point that the whole line just collapses and Russia rolls forward. I saw this happen in Syria after watching for years and years, and the U.S. backed terrorists, the Al Qaeda, and to some extent we backed ISIS also. They were just rolling over the country, and then some very, very astute moves by the Syrian Arab Army blocked them, blunted the attack. Russia provided some air power, and they began to roll back in the other direction. Iran began to supply some help. And at a certain point, there was almost a stalemate, somewhat similar to what they have on the front in Ukraine today. And you just watched it, and it went on and on and on. And at a certain point, there was just a great shudder in the Al-Qaeda's lines, ISIS lines, and they just began to fall back. They began to lose here, lose there, collapse, withdraw. And before long, the Syrian army was just racing forward. And at that point, the U.S. realized that if they were to salvage anything, they were going to have to put U.S. troops on the ground because the Al-Qaeda proxies, the ISIS proxies, were not going to pull it off. And so that's when we put our troops into northern Syria. But the point is that there was just after a lengthy period of stalemate, there was just a rather sudden collapse of the terrorist lines in Syria. And I could see something similar happening in Ukraine, where these guys have fought with enormous tenacity and courage, but I think they're reaching the breaking point in Ukraine, and the whole thing could come crashing down on them.
I think that's the expectation most people have. It's an interesting analogy with Syria, and maybe that's what's part of behind this this ridiculous and dangerous idea by little Macron in France to insert French and other NATO troops identified as such. After all, there are NATO forces there, but they're not declared. They're, in some in mufti capacity, I suppose, either in Ukrainian forces or as contractors or whatever, but actually putting uniformed NATO forces in there in some kind of a coalition of the willing kind of thing, hoping to stabilize Ukraine if at some point that collapse occurs. And you see other things that are very ominous for the Ukrainian side. Recently the head of the Gagauzia region in Moldova was in Moscow speaking to President Putin. She was talking about declaring Gagauzia's independence from Moldova if certain steps are taken from the Moldovan government. Of course, Moldova is directly abutting that part of Ukraine that would fall into Russian hands if Nikolaev and Odessa are taken by the Russians. So, again, there's all sorts of variables here that are extremely dangerous. But the initiative is not in NATO's hands, it seems to me, unless somebody wants to do something really, really dumb.
Well, I guess we will see what transpires in the near future. Jim, I thank you very much for being with us, and we'll have you back before too long.
Looking forward to it, Senator.
Okay, well, this has been Focus on the News. I'm Senator Dick Black with our dear friend Jim Jatras. We will be with you next Monday, and in the meantime, just keep the faith, and sooner or later we'll have a chance to redo this government. We'll see what happens then. Thank you very much.